Hello there, one and all, and welcome to this edition of the Weekly Chat. He's Ralph, I'm Peter. Let's do this. This week we're going to concentrate on alternative energy, something that I could do with quite at the moment because I'm a bit tired, but hey, it's okay. There was a very interesting story in the Daily Telegraph this week about Britain getting solar power imported from the Sahara via sea cables laid along the seabed. Now, that sounds a bit weird to me because you would have thought, surely, with the distance between, say, Morocco and Devon, which is where this substation is going to be, there's going to be a bit of wastage. But anyway, apparently the power that's going to get through is going to be great, and at least it's something, I guess. But this follows on from some stories that we've been seeing recently on alternative energy sources from last week about hydrogen and small modular reactors.
Indeed. Can I just jump in at this point? Because you mentioned the word last week.
Yes.
Last week was also the time where we normally record a podcast, but I think we didn't this time. And I think you would like to share the reason for this, Peter, would you not, with our listeners?
Yes. So, in my defense, before I say this, I am getting older, as we all are. And
I'm not.
I managed to lose my keys, and here they are. I managed to lose my keys, and in fact, I was looking for them for about an hour and a quarter before I found them, and was therefore missed my window with Ralph. So I apologise for that. I've apologised to him profusely for that, but I knew as soon as this happened that I will never hear the end of this ever.
So did you say you were getting old and it was your fault? Sorry, the line. I was going into a tunnel.
Yes,
I couldn't quite hear that. Could you repeat that, please?
Yes, getting old, forgetful.
I see.
Yes, exactly.
Very good.
Yeah.
Right. I see. I'm going to see how many references to keys I'm going to be able to key into this particular episode.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Anyway, go ahead. So yes. What do you? Where do you want to start?
What do you mean? What do I think?
Where do you want to
go on holiday in the Florida Keys this this summer? Yeah. No, sorry. Now I'm completely lost.
Who's your favorite?
Yes, very good.
Is it your favorite singer-songwriter pianist?
Oh yeah. Okay. Fine. Okay. I'm not going to rise to that. Now, what am I doing? Am I talking about something?
Yeah. Talk about hydrogen.
Okay.
Talk about hydrogen.
Do whatever you want.
Yeah,
Okay.
whatever, mate.
Right, whatever. Okay, cool. Right. So hydrogen, ladies and gentlemen, it is actually a very interesting story, which unfolded over the last.
Although you could say it was a bit low key.
Oh God, yeah. Look, I'm supposed to do this.
That's true.
You know.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
If I think of any, I will come up with them.
Cool. Well, the key to this particular thing is going to be that there is allegedly, in the assessment of journalists, going to be a gold rush towards natural hydrogen. And we have talked about hydrogen before in the context of electrolysis. And I actually stumbled over
electricity.
Yeah, or whatever. I stumbled over that word last time.
Yes.
Electrolysis. In the context of hydrogen-driven cars, which might actually well turn out to be an alternative to electric vehicles. Anyway, today we would like to talk a little bit about hydrogen and why this is potentially such a big deal. So why are people talking about a gold rush there? And I think it was all, well, maybe not all, but there was a recent find of natural hydrogen deposit in France, and I think they found something like 250 million tons of natural hydrogen in France, which the journalist said will cover global demand for about 2 years.
Wow!
And when I read this, I thought, well, it's a big deal then, is it? I mean, 2 years is not going to be very much, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but what are 2 years though, right? What are 2 years that'll be?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God, we're gonna be cooking on gas.
Yeah,
Uh,
hydrogen.
Indeed. But
Yeah,
so this needs to be seen in the context of what kind of hydrogen we are producing at the moment, because obviously this particular hydrogen is not man-made, whereas all the other hydrogen which we're currently using in order to service this demand of around 100 million tons a year is man-made.
Mm.
And so I'm going to delight you guys with a whole zoo of different forms of hydrogen which exist. And
Nice.
so I'm going to look at my list because I've written this down
Hmm.
so that I get this right now. So first of all, there is black hydrogen, and that doesn't sound very friendly, and it isn't, because that is produced by transforming coal to gas.
Hmm.
So we have coal dependency here, and this is obviously a no-no in a world which wishes to achieve net zero and CO2 zero emissions by, well, an ever um, ever less ambitious standard, but I think 2050 is still where we want to achieve this. So black hydrogen isn't good. The next one, which is a little bit better, is grey hydrogen. And you can see where this is going, don't you? I mean, this is a chromatic scale which is
Hmm.
getting increasingly better. So grey isn't quite as bad as black, but it's clearly still not very good. It uses a production process which is known as steam reforming. And the point for us here is simply that it uses a lot of CO2 in the process and it pumps it straight into the air. So that is not in any way a green hydrogen, which is another color. This is not green at all. But also, and this is a fact, it's sort of the opposite of a fun fact. I'm guessing it's like a
Boring
sadness
fact.
or like a tragedy fact.
Oh, right. Okay.
Apparently 95% of man-made hydrogen is produced by this process. So 95% of man-made hydrogen is grey. And grey ain't good because that pumps CO2 into the atmosphere. So at the
Mm.
moment, we can't really say that hydrogen is green. Forgive me my constant wordplay here with the colors. They're not mine. This is what you use apparently in the industry.
Hmm.
Next one up is blue hydrogen, which you possibly will have seen in the press. That is also steam reforming, but this one captures the CO2, so it's not quite as damaging to the environment, although it isn't particularly good either. The next one is a bit esoteric. It's called turquoise or turquoise. I don't even know what color that is. Hydrogen, and it's not
Greeny blue.
relevant.
It's
What's that?
greeny blue.
Is it really?
Yep.
Oh, the chromatic scale works then. The next one was blue. This is greeny blue, so it's a bit greener than blue, but it's also not
Like
particularly
sort of
good.
swimming pool blue, maybe.
All right. Oh, I
Yeah.
see. That sort of
Yeah.
blue
Turquoise, you'd
with
say.
algae in it.
Yeah.
And the next one is
What is turquoisey? What is turquoise hydrogen? Sorry.
it's generated by methane, splitting methane, a
Oh,
different
okay.
gas.
Yeah.
It's a little bit better than the other processes in terms of environmental friendliness, but it's not that great either. I understand.
Hence, it's not quite green,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not quite blue.
Exactly.
Hence,
Exactly.
turquoise.
Hence turquoise. These people have
Yeah.
really put some thought into
Nice.
these
Yeah. Nice.
color schemes
Yeah.
here. And then we're moving into the process of electrolysis. And in that particular production process, there are two forms of hydrogen. One is yellow,
Nice.
where there is a mixture of renewable and non-renewable energies which are going into the production of the electricity, which is used to split the hydrogen.
Mm.
So that one is so-so. It's neither here nor there, neither green nor black, basically. And the next one is my absolute favorite, because the next one is pink hydrogen. And maybe no prizes for guessing. That is when nuclear energy is being used to
Oh, right.
produce the electricity, so you turn pink, like an episode of The Simpsons or something.
Nice.
So there we are. That's the chromatic.
But you didn't mention green hydrogen, though.
Well, that's yeah. That's a sort of the chromatic zoo done now. The
Oh, okay.
green hydrogen is, of course, by reference to whether it is environmentally friendly or not. So black hydrogen is never green. Grey hydrogen isn't green. Blue hydrogen isn't green. Turquoise is a little bit green, but etc. You can see where this is going. It's all very clever.
Yeah.
But what is green is the naturally occurring hydrogen.
Okay.
No prizes for guessing again. That, of course, also is identified by reference to a color, and this is called white hydrogen.
Okay.
Or gold hydrogen. So white hydrogen is basically always green.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's listening to this anymore. Everybody's completely confused.
Ah.
Yeah, exactly. Switch off.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, there is, I hope, a point to this madness, because we are talking about white hydrogen. And just to remind you guys, so we are still talking about this deposit of 250 million tons of white hydrogen, of naturally occurring hydrogen, which was found in France. And I was saying this is going to last us 2 years and it's done. So that's not particularly interesting. But now we remember the tragedy fact that 95% of man-made hydrogen is basically gray, so not green. It's not good. Meaning only 5% is green. And so if you take this 250 million tons, which has been discovered, that translates into something like 40 times the amount of green man-made hydrogen. So in an effort to move towards an alternative energy setting, where we are using energies that are green, which do restrict CO2 emissions, white hydrogen, naturally occurring hydrogen, appears to be an inevitable building block of where the future energy production is going to go. And so what we had in the news then was a report by a US environmental agency which highlighted all this and came out with some numbers, and some journalists sensationalized this because apparently the total amount, the global amount of naturally occurring hydrogen is estimated to be 5 trillion tons. So that would basically be good for 50,000 years of hydrogen usage. But we can...
Not bad.
That's all right, isn't it?
That's okay.
Yeah.
I think we could just about, scrape through on that, maybe.
Yeah, but we need to whittle this number down, of course, because obviously that's not really the thing. Because not all of it, in fact, a small fraction is accessible. I mean, most of that is in wherever it might be. It's under the seafloor or under the Arctic ice, under Antarctica, etc., in volcanoes, so we can't really access it. But there are still about 100 billion tons of accessible natural hydrogen out there globally, and that is good for 1,000 years at the current rate of usage. Now, the current rate of usage is projected to go up to about 500 million tons, so about 5 times that. So now we're at 200 years. So I mean, these are just ballpark numbers, but they do highlight that I think humanity has got a viable alternative source of green, meaning environmentally friendly, energy production at their fingertips, which at a projected future rate of hydrogen demand might last us for 200 years. If we are able to access it, but that is of course why people talk about a gold rush, because currently this energy source is widely untapped, simply because we didn't used to need it. But now with the dynamics in the energy sector globally going where they are going, being two constraints in the main. One is it has to be CO2 CO2 neutral, and the other one, it has to be generated in geopolitically neutral countries where the free world has access to. This is increasingly more important, and that is the reason why we're seeing this gold rush towards hydrogen. And of course, one last statement perhaps from me on this. I said it's also, of course, energy self-sufficiency in the free world, which we need to sort of generate over time. And so one obvious question to ask would be, well, where is all this accessible 100 billion tons of hydrogen? It's not all in France, clearly, although some of it is. Some of it might be in Russia and China, and so that's not going to necessarily then answer our problems. And the answer to this question is surprisingly disappointing at the moment, because the answer is we don't know. And we don't know precisely for the reason that so far hydrogen has not been seen as a viable alternative energy source. But now that there is this rush towards it, we're going to do a lot more prospecting, and over the next few years our knowledge of where this particular raw material is situated is going to increase. And also you need to sort of remember the technology for extracting gas that already exists. So we can use that technology, adapt it, and to extract the hydrogen which we're going to find from the ground. Not all of it is going to be in the free world, but we're talking about, like I said, 200 years of usage here for global demand, equivalent which is situated worldwide. So even if only a fraction of that is to be located in the free world, it's going to gradually over the next few years supplant the use of all these other nasty colors, black and gray and pink. Although pink is better than you think, because we're going to talk about nuclear energy at some other point.
Do you think, like with this gold rush, people are going to go panning for hydrogen?
Yeah.
Or maybe just wandering around with candles and then just wondering, thinking, "Whoa, hold on a minute, there's a big flame."
Yeah, well, fantastic. There used to be a big deposit here. Now it unfortunately it's just exploded.
Yeah,
but yeah, definitely.
If you're suddenly walking along with a candle and it sort of singes your eyebrows or something, then you think, "Yeah, I've struck gold." Not gold. I've struck hydrogen.
Gas.
Yeah, struck gas. Yeah.
No, definitely. This is definitely going to happen in terms of maybe not with a sifting pan or whatever they use in the Klondike River in the 19th century, but certainly the prospering for hydrogen is going to increase. Absolutely. That's the gold rush, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm actually reasonably heartened by this. I do think it's an alternative energy source. And when we were talking about the hydrogen cars, I wasn't actually all that excited by it, because it was still largely a non-green way to produce energy. And as we have seen in our little rundown here, 95% of man-made hydrogen is grey, i.e. produces CO2, which is terrible. But this particular form of natural hydrogen will increasingly become a viable alternative.
Superb.
Pretty sure.
So there we go. That's all good stuff. On the on the hydrogen front, but of course there is the other stuff on the small modular reactor stuff. So this is, we've been talking about this over quite a long period of time, and it seems that they're not coming to a conclusion. Well, maybe sort of coming to a head with small modular reactors. Obviously, in the UK last year, the government put it out to tender. I think that they want to have some small modular reactors in the UK, and they put it out to tender. I think there's 6 companies now left in the process, one of which is Rolls-Royce, and the winner of that tender will get something like £20 billion worth of taxpayer money to to help them on their way.
Mhm.
And Rolls-Royce in its recent results and things, which were really good, said that it wanted put pressure on the UK government to come up with the goods and to give them the contract essentially. But has also been quite rightly talking to other countries as well, who are also interested in SMRs. So yeah, I mean, obviously we'll see how that goes. But SMRs again are something that are seen as to be very attractive. What do you think, Ralph?
Absolutely. And the more I look at SMRs and think about this, the more I do believe that this is also a viable alternative.
Mhm.
Although I'm not exactly sure whether the word alternative is the right word in this context, but or a viable addition to the range of energy sources which we are going to have to use in the future, all hoping that fusion energy is going to become commercially viable at some point, and all of this is going to be looked at the transition period from hindsight. But we're not there yet, and so until this happens, we need to develop all of these, all renewable and non-renewable energies which are CO2 neutral. That's really the way to express this, because I don't think you can say that nuclear energy is a renewable energy, because it is clearly not. It uses up resources. And by the way, hydrogen is a renewable energy. It does renew at a slow scale, but it does at a slow rate, but it does. Anyway, nuclear power is not renewable, but it is CO2 neutral, and so it would be derelict of duty not to at least look at it and see whether we can use it. Now, maybe some context here. I mean, maybe many of us, when they hear the word nuclear energy, immediately sort of start shaking their heads, and there is something about nuclear energy which just doesn't make you feel quite good about it. And I think we all know what that is, because there are two
Well, it's
things.
It's Homer Simpson, isn't it?
It's Homer Simpson,
And
exactly.
and Mr. Burns. I mean,
Yeah.
basically over years, really they have chipped away at confidence in the nuclear power industry. So yeah.
Enough said. I think we should just play these
Okay. Yeah.
episodes.
Mic dropped.
Yeah, mic drop. Done.
Yeah.
And so indeed, Homer Simpson refers in two ways. I mean, first of all, we all we all, let's say, concerned at the very least about the security risks embedded in this technology, or should I say the perceived security risks. So point number one, which would count against nuclear energy, is that it is perceived to be dangerous, or maybe it is dangerous. Let me make a few comments on that in a second. And the second one is, of course, nuclear waste. What are we going to do with that? And just a few pointers on that, because I don't think that the reality is quite as bad as the public perception of it is. The first one is security. Well, you've heard this from me before, perhaps, and I'm going to repeat it again because that's kind of what I do. I have knowledge of a certain number of things and just repeat them forever. So nuclear energy security. Well, yes, there have been some accidents, and these have been headline grabbing, but there weren't many. There was one, Chernobyl, the other one, 3 Mile Island or Harrisburg in the US, and of course, Japan. But Chernobyl doesn't really count, because Chernobyl was generated by Soviet-style incompetence and sort of committee-based administration. So you can't say that because Chernobyl blew up, that counts against nuclear energy per se. When nuclear energy is well managed and professionally administered, then it is much safer than that. And the second point about Chernobyl is it didn't have a containment. This was a very old style technology. All the modern power plants, remember The Simpsons, they all look like half domes or something, don't they? They have this concrete containment which is designed to keep the stuff that makes you pink inside when there is a meltdown. And Chernobyl didn't have that. So all of the radioactive emissions went into the atmosphere unhindered. And that's not how atomic power plants are built these days. So I think Chernobyl doesn't really count as a viable security concern because it would have been entirely avoidable, and it was avoided elsewhere. Now, 3 Mile Island, just quickly ticking these off. 3 Mile Island, yes, that was definitely a tick in the box on the wrong side of the balance sheet for nuclear power.
Was that Westinghouse that was responsible?
I can't remember who. Yes, I believe it's possible. I would need to check this.
Yeah.
But in the end, the containment held, and although there was environmental damage, it wasn't nearly as bad as you would have thought, not as cataclysmic as you would have thought would be definitely, inevitably, the consequence of a partial meltdown, because it was a partial meltdown. So it was almost the worst that could happen to an atomic power plant, and the environmental damage was limited. Japan, we know what happened there, but again, if you build your atomic power plant on a fault line close to a tsunami endangered region, then maybe that is also bad planning. I don't know. I'm not
such like the understatements of the year, but yeah.
We'll just put it out there,
Yeah.
So I think my point is,
although to be fair, I think that in Japan, the whole of Japan is very vulnerable to, because I think it's on the the edge of, is it something like 4 tectonic plates? I don't know exactly, but it's something like that, which is why Japan gets so many earthquakes. I mean, again, I'll say this because not everyone knows this, but if even in Tokyo, which is not generally thought of to be, I mean, there are worse places to be in Japan for earthquakes, right? But even in Tokyo, you get earthquakes every day. When it's when you first go there and you first experience it, it really freaks you out, because you think, is there something a bit strange going on? Because you can feel, it feels somewhat like a train going past or something like that, and it feels strange. And there are times when I would look, if I happen to have some water, on the desk or something, and I would, if I felt something a bit strange, I would look at the glass of water,
right,
to see whether the surface is shaking. But but there are times when you go to top of tall buildings and there's an earthquake, and they are designed to sway, and actually, if you go to the base of these, I mean, I don't know how this works, but there are wheels, these massive kind of wheels on the at the base of the building, and they kind of move with the. I don't know how that works, but
really?
It's very strange. Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, in Japan, I mean, the planning is bad, but having said that, I think that actually, I don't know whether there's anywhere in Japan that would be truly like okay. But the problem with Japan is it doesn't have much of its own resources, and yet it still requires a lot of energy, and therefore, I guess this is what this is one of the things that they can do, but it's tricky.
Well, it highlights that, of course, concerns about security are viable and they are valid. But my point is, I think that the public has developed a perception that nuclear energy is almost as dangerous as an unexploded nuclear bomb next to you, and that is certainly not that's just simply not the case. But even in Japan, we had only one major incident. And so security concerns are valid, but I think they're overblown. That is the point I was hoping to make. The second one can be ticked off reasonably quickly, which is nuclear waste. Yes, nuclear waste exists, it does happen, but the energy density of the material which is being transformed is so high that there is actually very little nuclear waste. And most of that very little nuclear waste is not even highly radioactive and can be safely stored, can be now safely stored, because the sort of technology which is built to allow safe storage of nuclear waste has of course also developed and improved over the years. So most of this can be now safely stored. Just to put this into context, since the 1950s, meaning in something like 70 years of commercial operation of nuclear reactors in the US, they produced 90,000 tons of nuclear waste. And that may sound to you like a big number, but it's actually not that bad. You can shove all that stuff into Arsenal's football stadium. I kid you not, that is true.
I think you'll find that Arsenal football supporters would potentially complain about that if you should in fact go ahead.
Maybe it will energize the team. Maybe I should be careful here. Guys, I don't follow football, so don't send me angry emails. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I do know that 90,000 tons of waste doesn't really take up a lot of space, and it's in 70 years of operational running of nuclear reactors. Of course, you need to, Europe ran some too, that's just the US, but basically the point is nuclear waste is also much less of a problem. So what is more of a problem then? I think more of a problem are two things. First, what you hear is it takes very long to build a nuclear power plant, and second, it costs a lot of money to do so. And this is what I would like to examine for a moment, because that's quite interesting. Because what you see often is that people claim that it takes about 10 years to build a nuclear power plant. Now, that's not actually really true. That's an average, which includes outliers. The answer is less, but it still doesn't mean that it's not true. It is a valid point. It takes about 5 to 6 years on average to build a nuclear power plant. That's the typical build time. It takes about 3 to 4 years to build a coal power plant or a more traditional non-renewable resource plant, let's say. So again, yes, it takes longer, but that doesn't take all that much longer. It doesn't even take twice as long. It takes like 50% of the time, again, which you use to build a coal power plant. So 4 years versus 6. That's the sort of order of magnitude. That still doesn't get us out of the problem here, because if we now, as societies, need to start replacing the energy production capacity which we had, increasing self-sufficiency away from Russia, etc. And if we start building now, then yes, obviously that still takes 6 years to do so, but it is not as disastrous as people sometimes, I think, are led to believe. The second point is more important. It's cost. And this is interesting, actually. Because you can't talk about absolute costs, of course, because that doesn't really mean very much. So people have developed another index which looks at the cost per kilowatt hour produced, but not just that. It uses all of the costs which are going into the production of this energy form. So it's construction cost plus running cost. And the thing which people use is called, I'm going to read this off my page here, the levelized cost of energy. That is an index which rolls all of these costs into one index number. And if you look at that particular cost index over time, then you see something interesting. From 2009 to 2017, nuclear power was about half the cost of gas and about level with coal. And then since then, the cost has risen, and it is now about 3 times as expensive as solar energy and twice as expensive as gas. So something has happened to the production costs of nuclear energy in the second part of this period, which I've been referencing between 2017 and 23. And it is interesting to see what that is, because it is actually that the labor productivity has reduced. But the reason why it has reduced relates to the public perception of nuclear power as dangerous. That has meant that lots of regulations have appeared around the construction of a nuclear power plant, which makes it A, longer to build it, and B, more costly. And this is known as the nuclear premium. But that is therefore the situation. That's the bigger picture of traditional nuclear energy. It takes relatively long to build, not as bad as people make it out to be, but still relatively long. It is clearly more expensive than other forms of energy. There is some nuclear waste, but it can be safely stored these days, so that's not really much of an issue. And it's dangerous, but that's more in the public perception than it actually is. So this is the framework into which we now slot these small modular reactors. And this is why I'm a fan of them, because small modular reactors are built in a different way. They're basically built off-site as modules. Clearly, that's where the phrase comes from, as modules.
Are they quite small?
And they are, I believe, quite small as well, relative to a full-blown power plant. They're shipped towards the site where they are needed. They're built up there from modular form. And because they are modular, the cost to build them is less than that for a traditional power plant. Because they are built off-site, the security concerns are much lower, and therefore the regulation, the red tape is lower. That reduces the costs for them to be built. It makes them even safer than or potentially safer than the than the traditional nuclear power plants, which, as I have highlighted, are probably safer than meets the eye anyway. And finally, of course, so these are all points in favor of it. But then, of course, there's an elephant in the room, basically, and you may all be twitching and saying, yes, but they're small. So the capacity isn't as great, isn't it? And of course, that's the case. But if you actually look at this, they produce typically about 300 megawatts. Whereas the large ones produce typically something like 1,000 megawatts. So that's not orders of magnitudes away. So if you stick 3 or 4 of these small modular reactors together, then you have the capacity of a big one. And I apologize to anybody who knows more about this than I do. This does sound simplistic, what I just said. I'm sure it is simplistic. I'm sure there are diseconomies of scale. You can't just take 3 or 4 of them, stick them together, and you have the same capacity. That may well be. But my point is that the output energy capacity of an SMR is not orders of magnitudes smaller than that of a traditional power plant. Add to that it takes less time to build and is much less costly, and they are arguably safer, and there is less bureaucracy around them. And you have, I believe, a viable future alternative in the gamut of energy production capacity which are open to us. In particular, if you think about the fact that we need to create energy sources which are CO2 neutral, then nuclear energy is an indispensable part of CO2 neutral forms of energy. And if we now have the capacity through SMRs to do that in a more efficient and in environmentally more friendly way, in a way which the public will not regard as dangerous as the traditional sources of nuclear power, then that is definitely a tick in the box, and I believe a viable way forward as well.
I mean, it is a very interesting, power source, and it will present its own challenges, I'm sure, because if you can have more of them, then there are more difficulties for where do you site them.
Mhm.
I mean, I would have thought, presumably at the moment, the low hanging fruit is siting them on, where old sites were, are decommissioned or about to be decommissioned or whatever, because they'll be used to that. But I suppose that, once they run out, and don't think there are many of them, then I think there'll be more difficulties, because also there's the argument, isn't it, that you want it to be closer to where it's going to go. But again, people aren't going to be enormously enamored by the prospect of having an SMR next door.
Yeah, but you see, that's an interesting point. I may, excuse me, I may want to say that perhaps the government's responsibility here is to educate people more about what this technology is,
Yeah.
and to highlight exactly what the security concerns may be. So neither say, oh, there is no issue here, trust us, nor basically demonizing this technology. Obviously, the government wouldn't, of course, do this, but other sources might do. So I think what is called for is a sensible and responsible form of educating the public about this source of energy, because even these SMRs are even capable of burning nuclear waste. Would you believe it? I mean, not all of them. I mean, and not all nuclear waste, but there is a possibility there. But yes, you are right. I mean, I don't think nuclear energy is ever going to be viewed as something which is as safe as perhaps solar energy or a wind farm. But then people also don't want to necessarily live next to a wind farm, because that produces sound. And so there are always these issues, and they all have to be solved. I would say, in general, the more alternatives we have for the production of energy, the better we are going to fare. And we already talked about two now. One is natural hydrogen, which is going to be a part in that range of possibilities in the future. And the other one is SMRs, which is surely going to be seen also by the public as better than traditional nuclear power plants.
Yeah, absolutely. So we shall see, won't we? I mean, I suppose it seems to me that you need a mix of renewables in order to reduce any volatility in supply. And I have often thought how amazing it is that we are really talking about nuclear power for the long term, when it feels to me like over, let's say, until maybe the early 2020s, that actually nuclear was on the way out. I mean, I think when Macron originally got into power, I believe that he had these very sort of punchy targets about reducing France's use of nuclear power, and France is well known for having a high percentage of a higher percentage of its energy mix generated by nuclear power than some other countries. And the fact that he was talking about bringing that down, and now the narrative has changed completely. It's pretty amazing, really, to see how far we've come. And again, I suppose, again, sounding like an old man, but going back to Fukushima, that is, and again, that was amazing, actually, Ralph. Right? Because so that was TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power. Shortly after, like literally a few months after that, I was taking Kansai Electric Power. So this same kind of deal, but in a different region, sort of just over.
Hmm.
Also talking about nuclear power, because they had nuclear power stations, and I was going around with them to all the clients, and we were talking about, could Fukushima happen? Could this happen? What are you doing?
Yeah.
It was very interesting, to hear it. I mean, to kind of hear it from the horse's mouth, as it were,
Yeah.
as to what they were doing. And I remember thinking at that point, wow, is this the death of this, really? But clearly, no. It's come back again, and in a different form, I guess, but pretty amazing.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? We are all under so much pressure here to find reliable and sustainable energy sources,
Mm,
both from the geopolitical envelope, which we've been discussing, but
mm,
also, of course, more importantly, perhaps even, no, perhaps about it, more importantly, from global warming. We have to do something. I mean, it cannot continue like this. By
mm, mm,
2050, the world is going to be incinerating in its own juice, basically,
mm,
if this continues like this. And so there is no alternative. We have to find CO2 neutral forms of energy.
mm,
And what I would say is that yes, the security concerns are of course valid, but we um, it is clear to me that the environmental damage and the uh, physical danger to people in our societies is more pronounced to come from global warming if left unchecked
mm,
than from a technology which is well developed, safely engineered, and CO2 neutral. And
mm,
so from that point of view, I would plead that that nuclear energy is going to be used increasingly as a viable source of energy, and not demonized as something um, which is more dangerous than it actually is.
mm, mm,
All of that always within the understanding that we all hope that fusion energy is going to
mm,
take over at some point,
mm,
and all of this is going to be a transitional period. That
mm,
may well be, but that is the period which we are in currently, and I think the cost benefit analysis would surely be coming down in favor of nuclear energy. To your other point, yes, we are here now in a world where we are looking again at nuclear energy, and that's a needs must situation, isn't it? This is
mm,
just it's just we probably all would like to not have it, but if we have to have it, then now is the time to actually look at it again.
mm,
And it goes as far as young people, students, members of Gen Z are um, pressurizing Greenpeace to um, to adopt a more conciliatory attitude
mm,
towards nuclear energy. So the atmosphere is clearly changing here.
mm,
And you mentioned France. Yes, I mean Germany is probably an even better
mm,
case
mm,
in point, because Germany in the 80s into the 90s had maybe globally leading, but certainly European leading nuclear technology.
mm,
And it allowed its position within that energy source to degrade, and without, I would argue, real necessity, they made a political decision to exit from nuclear energy. And the
Oh, but that was from Fukushima, though, wasn't it? Because I mean,
not just Fukushima,
mm,
also 3 Mile Island,
yeah,
but you're
but
right, yeah.
it's just because I seem to remember that at that point. So it seemed to me that Angela Merkel was on the ropes in terms
Yes,
of
correct, that's
political
correct.
popularity and things going into 2010, 2011. She was up for re-election, and Fukushima happened,
Hmm.
and she basically said, right, okay, 'cause she went from being, so she did a 180, didn't she? She went from being a very strong advocate of nuclear to suddenly going, a 180 and saying, actually, no, we're going to move away from it. And as a result of that, I think largely as a result of that, she got another term in power. So I think that's, I mean, it seems to me that that's the way, that's why it went that way. And maybe again, maybe I'm looking at it in too simplistically, but maybe that's the time when Germany and Russia really got much closer, because
right.
she was thinking, well, okay, so we're getting rid of nuclear, but what do we do
Exactly.
instead? Because of our massive manufacturing capability, we've got to get the energy from somewhere. And then Russia comes along and says, well, you know, we can sort that out for you.
Have some gas from
Have
us.
some gas. And then it just sort of escalated from there, didn't it?
That's right. And no, I think that's largely correct. And it just highlights, hindsight is 2020,
Yeah, of course,
clearly, but it does highlight what a disastrous decision that has turned out to be, because Germany did have globally leading nuclear technology, and I would still argue without necessity exited from that. And the consequence was that, first of all, they became more dependent on Russian gas, and second, from French nuclear energy, because they're importing about 70, no, I don't know exactly what that is, but a large percentage of French produced nuclear energy is imported or exported to Germany, while the French nuclear technology is not as good as the German technology used to be. So, but then, of course, these are all of these decisions are always in a political envelope, of course. But the fact that Merkel basically spearheaded the exit from nuclear energy in Germany was driven, I agree, by Fukushima, but then also it was driven by mounting political pressure from a increasingly leftist green ecological lobby within Germany, who are now in government, by the way. And so all of this, what's that?
One of the many.
Yes, indeed. All of this drove this particular exit from nuclear technology. But now we know where we are, and we can all see that from hindsight has turned out to be the wrong decision.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's not just France or Germany, but all nations in the free world are highlighting nuclear energy again. But again, and this is, I think, also important to understand, not necessarily in a simple repeat of what has gone on before, but in an attempt to seek better technological solutions, more efficient solutions within the nuclear envelope, and SMRs are one of these technologies.
So there we go. I mean, I hope that everyone feels energized
and glowing
after this podcast. Actually, not many key puns, to be honest.
No, I couldn't get them in. I had to concentrate on the energy, on the hydrogen, and on the colors.
The puns are good, but they've got to be in context, haven't they? Otherwise, they would jar. So anyway, so I'll leave you there before you can get anything in. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Where's my crib sheet with key jokes?
Yeah. So anyway, thank you very much indeed. We'll obviously be back again, again soon.
Well, that depends on whether you find your keys or not. Yeah. That wasn't a joke. That's just an important public safety announcement.
So thank you very much indeed. Have a great day, whatever you're up to, and we'll be back again soon.
Excellent. Thanks for listening, guys. Thank you.
Bye.